right, let's get started. So our topic today is time to talk training. A few little housekeeping tips before we get started. I will stop for questions periodically, but there is a question box on your menu bar to the right. As we're going through, if you have questions you would like to ask, if you could submit them into the question box, I will watch it as we're going and try to answer as I see things come in. Hopefully you can all hear me. Can somebody type an acknowledgement into the question box that you can hear me? Perfect. A bunch of people checked. Awesome. Not teaching from home today. I'm with one of our clients, so I'm not always sure how the phone system is working. So perfect. As now that a bunch of you had tested out the question box, you know where to put your questions. So let's get started. So, no. There we go. So our topic today is on training. We're going to start out quickly with some introductions. Obviously, for those of you that have been here before, you know who I am, etc. But we're going to go through that very quickly. Our topic today is training. We actually, and I'll talk in a second, this is the second webinar we've done on training. Our focus today is on putting together a training plan and how to execute it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what training is and isn't. We're going to talk about best practices in putting together a training plan, talk about training not just for the current initiative you're on, but for the future, and then wrap up in a Q&A. So, who am I? Most of you have been with us before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but my name is Pam Ingram. My title is Change and User Adoption Wrangler. I've been with Clearview for about a year. My job is, in addition to managing implementations, is to work with firms to try to help them through those softer things, process change, getting buy-in, and building tools within the system that help with user adoption, that make the system easier to use, more user-friendly, and easier for you to sell internally to your users. I came out of the AE space many years ago. My education is in psychology, and I'm working on a master's in organizational innovation and change leadership. And my title is partially Wrangler because I also own and show horses. Most, if not all of you, are Clearview clients or potential Clearview clients, so I won't spend much time at all on who we are, but we are the manufacturer, the makers, the designers, the builders of InFocus software. Clearview is the company name. Most people use those two interchangeably. I mentioned that this is the second webinar we've had on training. Out on our website, and I've put the link here, and we will make these slides and the recording available at the end of the webinar, are all of our pre-recorded previous webinars. We did one a few months ago on learning styles. And if you did not attend or have not watched that webinar, I would highly recommend it. What we focused on in the previous one was the different ways that people absorb and learn. Some people learn by hearing, some people learn by seeing, some people learn by doing. And there was a lot of tips and tricks related to that we won't go into today. So I do suggest that you go back and take a look at that information. So let's get into today's topic. So our first thing is, what is training? So there is a huge difference, and one that we don't pay enough importance to, between demonstrating something and actually training somebody how to do something. Simply put, demonstrating is showing how good you are at something. Training is actually trying to transfer knowledge, transfer ability, and make them better at doing something. And one of the big flaws that we see in most training is it really is demonstrating. It's how quick can I move the mouse around, and you click here and you click here and you click here and you do that. We're not trying to transfer knowledge and ability. So as you're developing training, you really should be thinking less, how do I show someone how to do something? And more, how do I make how do I empower them to be able to do it well themselves? Okay. So as we talk about transferring knowledge and ability in training, what does that mean? How do I do that? The first thing is be very clear what the expectation is. When people come to training, often we don't spend enough time before the training, even telling them what they're there for or what they should expect to be able to do. One of the things I really like and I try to put in all my training decks is if you go to any kind of program that offers CEUs or continuing education of any type, one of the requirements is that they have to have a slide at the beginning of the presentation that tells you the outcomes and objectives. So things along the lines of, at the end of this class, you should be able to explain what project-based accounting means, or create a client record, or understand the difference between billable and non-billable. By telling people up front what they need to know, you're also setting the stage for what they're going to focus on as you're going through the training. The second thing in transferring knowledge, and this is where majority of training falls down, is making it hands-on. As I mentioned, the previous webinar was on learning styles. One of the learning styles is called kinesthetic. And kinesthetic means I learn by doing. The majority of people absorb best when they are touching it or doing it. Not only if that's their main learning style, but because it also makes them focus. It is really easy to multitask during a training session if somebody else is driving. The more you can make training somebody hands-on, having them take the mouse and drive while you talk them through it, or having them do practice exercises or something, not only are most people going to absorb it better, but you're going to have more of their brain also. Having practice exercises both within the class, but also takeaway exercises. So I always make sure from a training session that when I'm putting together the handout that we're going to give as the takeaway, there are also exercises in it for them to try when they get back to their desk. And not only the exercise itself, enter a new client, set up a dashboard, whatever we're teaching on, but that there is also the answers to it. So not only do I present the exercise, but then I show the screenshots of how to do it so that they know if they're doing it right or wrong. Next thing is there needs to be a safe environment when you're training. And that means two things. One means you can't scare the people you're trying to train. You have to have an appropriate reaction when they don't understand something or they do it wrong. The more you jump down their throat and scare them, the less they're going to try. But the other thing is it is critically important that you always have a sandbox environment. You want to tell people in training they don't have to worry about making a mistake. Most people, particularly when we're looking at in focus, are so worried they're going to mess up the live data that they don't even want to try things that aren't risky. By telling them this is a sandbox, which is usually for most rooms just a copy of their current database. No matter what you do in here, you're not going to break it. You're not going to hurt anything. That takes a lot of the fear away and gives them that place to just try. The other thing we don't do well with training is follow-up. We have a training session and we give them some exercises and we wish them luck. And we say, if you have any questions, come find me or ask. A lot of times people don't even know the questions to ask if you don't know what you don't know. And by having a schedule, okay, in a week, we're going to have a follow-up phone call. Then they know that they're going to have a check-in. It puts a little pressure on them to actually do some homework, but it puts some more formality because for most people, they're not going to have questions until they go and try it. They're not going to know the questions there. So we've just instituted with some of my implementations, we do a training session on accounts payable processing. We then have a follow-up a week later just to say, do you have any questions? Did you run into any problems? Because we realized we were training and moving on and not really doing that follow-up. Don't see any questions yet inside the question box. So, another important thing is separating the why from the how. Training is about much, much more than pressing buttons on a piece of software. And the biggest challenge in most firms is getting buy-in, getting people to agree to do something. We particularly see this in things that are sometimes less obviously necessary. So if we tell people we have to get an invoice out, nobody questions why. We need to get paid. We need to bill our clients. But when we start to do things like asking people to put project plans in or update their percent complete or resource management, then there becomes a lot more, I'm busy, I don't have time, that's not important. And the biggest mistake we usually make is we start the training out by pulling up the tool and showing them how to do it. Where really we need to make our value statement and our business case totally separate from the training. And so we really want to be talking about, if I was looking at project planning, for example, why is it important to have a project plan? Why is it important to update the budget and the resources needed weekly? How do we use that information as a company? I'm not going to talk about the software or the tool, whether that tool is in Focus or Microsoft Project or anything else. I'm going to talk about it from a conceptual point of view. Why does it matter? And then we're going to step away. We're not going to do this in the same session. That's the other mistake. Firms that I've worked with on training hear this concept and like, okay, we'll talk about why in the first half and then how in the second half. The minute you jump to how, the why gets pushed right out of their brain because now they're a little overwhelmed with a new technology. So we really want to separate those in time and space, teach the why, walk away, a week later have the training on the how. If you haven't built the why benefit enough, unfortunately what happens is the software becomes the scapegoat. Well, we have to update our project plans because they bought that stupid piece of software instead of, oh, yeah, I get that. The owner of the company needs to be able to see if there's going to be work for everybody in a month, and I'm contributing to that through entering my projects and keeping them updated. The why really becomes the important part, but is what is typically pushed out of people's heads because we look at training as a software thing. The good news, if you've really invested the time in the why, is that the how becomes much easier. A lot of what goes on in training sessions, if you sit in a company's training session, is people asking why. We could be teaching on timesheet entry. And we start to have the conversation break down into, I'm busy, I don't have time, I don't understand why I need to review it. A lot of why questions get mixed into the how. If you've already addressed that why, you've moved that out of the picture. Any questions? I don't see anything in the box on the what is training. Okay, then we'll keep going. So great, I get all that, Pam. I get I need to have a training plan. I need to separate why and how. I need to actually try to transfer knowledge. How do I start working through that path? So training should not actually be where you start. Training, if done logically, follows process. You need to figure out how things are going to happen in the company to figure out who needs to get trained and on what. So I have an example below. We've sat down and we've done the opportunity process and we've figured out, okay, our process is going to be the project manager goes into the database and they open up their opportunity. So what people would typically then do is they'll put together a 20-minute training and they'll try to cram everything into that 20 minutes. And then we wonder why people come out of there totally overwhelmed and they don't get it all. And then we say they're stupid. So instead, break it down into its pieces. So you can see, you kind of got to look at it. And it's really good to work with somebody who hasn't been doing this for years One of the things that I do when I put together training is I actually go and bother one of my friends and I walk them through it. They have no experience with the software. They have no experience with the process. And I come out of it with, can they do that at the end? So for opportunities, first of all, we'd be having a why training. We'd be doing a training on why does having a pipeline matter to the company? Why does keeping that pipeline up to date? What do we do with the pipeline information? How does it fit into the bigger picture of the company? And we've got all the why out of the way, and we let them do all the I don't wanna and all that and get that out of the way. Then we do multiple how trainings. I'm a big proponent of it is better to do more short trainings than it is to do one big training. It's more frustrating because you have to get on people's calendars more often, but they are going to retain. If we try to put too much information into people's heads all at one time, the only thing to remember is maybe the last thing you said and everything else is going out the other ear. So we would do a training on how to, because an opportunity at the end of the day, if you look at your opportunity field, I need to be able to put in who the client's going to be, and it might be a new potential client. I need to put in a contact if it's a new potential contact. So I'm going to teach it kind of in a building order. So I'm going to teach them how to put the company in, the firm we're going to potentially work for. Then I'm going to teach them how to put the person in. And then once they've got all those pieces, now we're going to bring it together with putting the opportunity in. Okay. My training plans, I really like taking the approach of almost building what looks like a college catalog. So I give all of mine a code because that's what shows up in other documents, but it's got a title defining how we're going to teach it, how long it's going to take to teach. And then because you've defined your processes, you have the ability to go through and say, who needs each of these people? So really thinking about this as a course catalog, and you may have different versions of something. If I'm teaching search and report or even just searching, I might have search basic and search advanced. One group only needs the 20-minute search basic. Another group needs the other. The other thing I tend to put in my plans, I didn't put it on this screen, but is also, is there a prerequisite? Like you can't go to entering contacts unless you've already completed entering clients. So also thinking about the prerequisites. Any questions on that? Okay. Training materials. Training materials are huge, and they should really follow. If you actually looked at one of my course catalogs, going back here a bit, they actually have a few more columns on them of, have I made my slides? Have I made my handout? Have I made whatever? So that it becomes more comprehensive. But training materials are huge. And I'll say it right up front, training materials are a pain in the butt because they become a full-time job. Because every time we make a change, screenshots have to be updated and other things, which is why I'm also a proponent of having them somewhere electronic versus paper so that people can go grab the most recent version. But the training materials that I really believe are important when you're putting together a training plan is, first of all, training notes are outlined for the trainer. We're going to talk in a minute about who is the best to do training, but I believe that you should be able to have multiple people in your company able to train on the same thing, but the training be the same. So that you actually have, these are the things that should be covered. Because otherwise, if I've got one person teaching on setting up a project, they might think 3 things are important. If I happen to get somebody else, I might get 20 things. So having an outline, what are we trying to cover? Having a handout for in-class. This one I go back and forth on. We don't always do this one. Depends on the topic. Sometimes it's good for them to be able to have that handout to take notes on so that they have some things. But the takeaway handout to me is much more important. A configured system. So this goes back to what we were talking about in the sandbox, but also not only the place for them to practice, make sure before you give a training session, you've gone in and made sure the system is set up for it. Nothing is more frustrating than being a participant in a training session and getting there and the trainer going, oh wait, I can't show you that because we didn't set that up. So make sure you've practiced. Make sure that the system is configured and you're not getting surprises. I train a lot in a demo database just because we know what that data is. Training off the live database can be really risky because if somebody changed something 5 minutes before your training session, it's always fun to try to do hand puppets for that. Slides. So some presentations, it makes sense to have a PowerPoint. I like to, even if all the training is in the software or on another topic, I like to do what I call slide wrappers, which, again, we talked about setting the expectation at the beginning. So a slide says, this is what we're here for. This is what you can expect to get. And then we may close those slides while we're in the database, but then pulling it back up and kind of recapping. But it makes a nice giveaway also for people to go back and look at later. It also helps when you have multiple trainers. Most important to me is takeaway handouts. Again, you should have handouts that if somebody has no knowledge on the topic, the handout alone will make them functional. And I try to include in my handouts not only the instructions, but like I said, now you try it, examples and answers. Somebody posted the question, is there a training material template? We do not have a standard one for InFocus yet. It's actually something I'm driving to. But Kevin, if you're interested, shoot me an email and I can send you a couple examples of ones I've done that you could definitely use as a template. Okay. Training timing. This is always interesting because you have to find this really great balance between not waiting until too late in the process so that you're already up and live and running and you're training them and you want them to go do it and be okay with it today. But you also want to be close enough in that it's remembered and that your system's ready, particularly if you're doing a new implementation. You don't want to start training and then decide you're going to make a change and then have to train. So there's a balance. And a lot of times this balance requires that you do more than one training session. So we talked about the follow-up. You might, let's say we're going to go live in February, or we're rolling out a new piece of the software and it's going to come live in February. You may want to do the training in January because people need time to absorb. For those of you that haven't heard my presentation on emotions of change, that one's out on the website also. But there are a lot of personalities of change that do not do well until they've had time to process. They need time to get comfortable. And if you train them and then say, and we expect you to go do it starting today, they're going to have a very difficult time with that. So you want to give them that time to practice and absorb. So we may do that training in January. But we want to make sure in February we want them to do it, they remember it. So that may be where we schedule a follow-up. We do the training in January and then we have a follow-up the week that we're going to roll it out and just kind of provide a refresher. Has anybody got any questions? And come at it from that perspective. Selecting the right trainer. This is critically important. Our tendency for reasons that make sense is we're going to pick whoever knows it the best to be the trainer. That is wrong for a lot of reasons. So that usually in most firms leads to accounting doing 95% of the training. Part of the challenge of that is sometimes the person that knows how to do it the best does it so automatically that they do not know how to explain it to anybody else. I've had this with my horses and with riding too. I've worked with horse trainers who are amazing riders. They win everything at every horse show, but they do it so automatically that they don't even think about their steps, and they have no capability of transferring that knowledge to somebody else. So you need to make sure that the person has the capacity, the tools in their toolbox, to actually be able to share what they do, not just show what they do. The other thing is, and it's why I chose the picture I did on this one of the little girl looking at herself in the mirror, people equate a lot to learning from somebody like them. So you really want to break up a lot of times your training by functional group and get a trainer who speaks their language. And what I mean by that, and I've seen this over and over again, particularly with timesheets, is we can have timesheet training come from accounting, and we can have it come from a project manager to a group of PMs. They could say the exact same words, the exact same way, and what's going to happen is the PMs are going to look at the accounting person and subconsciously from the first minute go, you don't get me, you're a lot like me, you don't understand my world. And that's human nature. That's not pointing at PMs or anybody else, because accountants would do the same thing. If I go in and try to teach general ledger and I'm not an accountant, they're going to look at me and go, you don't have a clue, even if I had a PhD in it. People want to feel that the person they're hearing understands their day-to-day. So often that best voice is not the power user. It's somebody that is of a similar nature to the audience, so that there is likability, but beyond likability, there's just that feeling of you get me. It's also important, like I said, that for that reason, that multiple people in the company can train on the same thing, which is why it's important to have training notes, to have at least an outline so people know what they're training on. So if we're training on project setup, I might have a department manager teaching to the other department managers. I might have a project manager teaching to the PMs. For the accounting group, we might have somebody from the accounting group. But they should all get the same training, but we've put it into the voice that feels comfortable for them. And the last thing on here seems really obvious, but it's one of the places we fall down. Don't forget to set aside time to train the trainers. You've created that outline, you've created those training materials, but we never usually take the time to walk the trainers through it. And that same thing, let the trainer know what you're expecting from the training. Make sure they know how to impart. Have a walkthrough for that training. I like to have them train it to me more than me talking or speaking on anything. Questions on any of that? You guys are very quiet today on questions. All right. So our last topic, we're going to get through this pretty quickly today, is training for the future. A lot of times when we're putting together a training plan, all we think about is where we are right now. So if we're in the middle of a new implementation, we're going to think about training our existing employees. If we're rolling out a new functionality, we're going to think about training the people that are going to need to use that. But we really, as you're putting that catalog together, should be thinking about that catalog serving you across the company and for the future. And the way I like to do it, particularly for the first two bullets here, is you almost, and again, a lot like a college class or a college program, I use the security, the permissions as kind of my gate. You can't be moved to the X security role, the X permission group, until you've done all the classes that lead up to that. That changing their role in the system or in the company or giving them the company credit card or whatever the outcome of what you're doing is the graduation. You have to have gone through all the things that get you there. And unfortunately, in most companies, particularly as busy as we are, we're like, yeah, we'll throw him in the PM access group and then we'll figure out how to train him maybe, because we need to put him on a project. And all that does is kind of create a spiral that works against us. So even with a new hire, I recommend to firms have a security access in your system that's new hire. And here's the information we would give somebody on their first day that knows absolutely nothing about the system. And then we're going to schedule them for their different trainings. Once they've had those trainings, now I'm going to move them into the role that they'll be in. So again, use that as a way to measure if it's happening. Same thing with promotions. Okay, we're going to promote Bob to department manager. Okay, well, we have in our course catalog for the department manager role, we need these. Bob's already had these 5. He needs to get these 2 additional. So really, again, having a professional development plan around your internal training. And the other thing is ongoing refreshers, particularly as your company changes, as your system changes, or just periodically running through, particularly the ones that are kind of the lunch and learn style. Once a year, we're going to cycle through these or whatever frequency we need to do it on. Just looking at questions quick. Oh, thank you, Adam. That was actually a very nice compliment. He said he's been doing this for a while and only formally recognized it in the last few years and wish somebody had said this sooner. So thank you. So where does this all fall apart? I really love this quote. And I've seen it attributed from everybody from Cookie Monster to some great CEOs to some other things. But we hear all the time, well, what if I spend a lot of money training people and they leave? I'm putting all this investment into them. But like the quote says, we really need to be stopping saying, we have to live with them for a long time. And if we haven't trained them, what does that look like? So where does training tend to fall apart? The first is not seeing training as an investment. Training is expensive. And even if you're doing it in-house, I totally get it. We are taking people away from billable time often. We have to invest in somebody training. We have to invest in training materials. But frankly, I think this is a position in an organization. 90% of the organizations I visit do not have a training coordinator, and they should. Because a lot of what they're struggling around is there's nobody whose job is making sure people get trained, making sure training materials either exist or are updated, and are keeping up with changes and are making sure those refresher training things happen and other things. So it's definitely something I would encourage firms to be thinking about is how much time and effort are we putting in because people don't know things, that investing in part or all of somebody's job being training is probably a lot cheaper than the outcome of not doing it. The second biggest thing, and I kind of mentioned this on the slide before, but not having milestone training. I hear it all the time. I'll go and I'll work with a firm and yep, we got everybody trained and everything's good. And I go away and I come back a year later or 6 months later and I'm met at the door by somebody who tells me immediately they were good for a while and then they all got stupid. So I've locked them all out of the system. The 2 questions we talk about is how many new people have you hired? And more importantly, how many people have you promoted? And inevitably, they have not stopped in them training at those times. So yes, everybody got stupid because we put them in a new job and we haven't empowered them with transferring that information. The next place it falls apart, not staying current with changes, both on the training and the training material. We're seeing this at InFocus. And like I said it at the beginning, training materials are a lot of work. There is no way around that, but they have huge value. But right now, our software is going through, particularly with our 2019 release, we're rolling out a lot of great new functionality every week. This week, we rolled out something new with password login. Okay, well, that means I got to go update all my screenshots, but it also means companies need to go update their screenshots or utilize, all of you that are Clearview clients, Remember, you have access to all of the stuff that's out on our support site. So a lot of those handouts automatically get updated. But one way or another, we got to stay current with changes. And it's not just changes in the software. You might have taught a Y on something, and now you've changed. You've become multi-company. You've added other divisions. You've added more offices. And those are the moments we should be thinking about, what do we need to go back and recommunicate? What do we need to go back and train on? And this is, again, where things fall apart. Most firms in the AE space are really great at training on technical. Oh, yeah, we have lunch and learns. We have vendors come in, or the Revit people come in, or whatever. But we don't think about the training, or don't invest on the training on our internal stuff, on our own house, and on our processes, and on our software. And in that same vein, training is one and done. Yep, we can check the box. Everybody learned how to do contact. And not having that follow-up, not having that refresher, particularly for things people don't do all the time, really having that time to come back and look at it and visit it again. All right. Any questions at this point? We'll just watch the screen for a second. We got done a little earlier, about 10 minutes earlier than I thought, because you guys aren't asking questions today. All right, well, it looks like nobody has any questions, so we're going to conclude here. We do have a monthly webinar series that I do that this is part of. I'll give you a little sneak peek because I haven't gotten them updated yet, but I'm actually the one I'm going to be offering next month. We're going to go a little more technical again. We're going to go back into our Yes, You Can Do It series. Last month we did analytic dashboard. Next month, we are going to do user-defined fields and user-defined tables. I will get that invite up in the next couple days, but we're going to talk about how you can tailor your database to hold information that you may not have a field for right now, so that we can get you out of some of those Excels and other things. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again next month. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody.